Hey, and welcome everybody. I'm Jen Walinga, and I'm a professor of communication and culture at Royal Roads University. Welcome to our webinar series, Sport, Leadership, and Social Change. We'll introduce our fabulous guests shortly, and welcome to all our participants. We're seeing lots of friendly faces in that gallery out there, and let's get started. And thanks for taking a bit of time out of watching the Olympics, as we're all very glued, I'm sure, although it's helpful, at least with the time change, that we're not feeling like we have to watch it all day long. I'm getting close, though, I gotta say. I want to acknowledge the lands that I'm operating on here in my home office, but also out at Royal Roads when I'm on campus. We are on the lands of the Lekwungen and Kusepsin peoples, the Lekwungen speaking First Nations. We also refer to them as Songhees and Esquimalt. And of course, we have to acknowledge it's our responsibility, even though we're not directly responsible for the harms inflicted over the many hundreds of years in Canada on our First Nations people. We have the responsibility to now do better and really acknowledge the gaps in our history and work hard to reconcile our practices with our principles here in Canada of equity, respect, and peace. This is the path that I walk down with my dogs every day. I always like to showcase a little bit of the campus at Royal Roads. And I always like to, I have family in Calgary, so rub this into their face that this could be either the winter or the summer. We don't know. There's the winter. And this wonderful picture here, I just want to always stop and reflect on that, along with the path that I take to my office, very similar to the one that I follow every day with the dogs when I'm here at this office. It's really about, finding your own path through transformation at Royal Roads. We shine a light down on the path, but we're not pulling you down any kind of path. You're discovering it as you go. And the bridge is another sort of seminal symbolic artifact here on campus. It really represents communication for us at the School of Communication and Culture, but more importantly, even diversity, the importance of understanding the two sides. Before you can build a bridge, you need to understand what's on the other side, whether it's eroding and needs a bit of support, or whether it's going to expect some sort of different kind of treatment. So when you're talking about intercultural communication, right, really understanding the differences and embracing the diversity, whether the bridge is something structural like that, or whether it's a handshake or some kind of dialogue or effort to understand one another. This webinar is really about sport, but it's about all the truths that sport is inherently protecting. And I row my boat every day. I was out there this morning and the water was glass, beautiful, but that skinny little boat teaches me something every day. And as I reflect on my career of probably over, way too many decades, 45 years, and all that it has taught me, I really think it's probably taught me more than the hundreds of years I've spent in academia. So today it was really about the importance of one thing at a time, one thing at a time. Sport offers such a strong platform as well. It has the greatest reach of any human endeavor. The Olympics are the most watched, most engaged in human endeavor in the world. And athletes know that. They know they have a strong platform, and so they use it. They're leaders. They're learning to be leaders through their sport experience, and then they leverage the platform to fight for various rights and equities and opportunities and access for individuals all over the world. At Royal Roads, we embrace a lot of these same kind of principles that we understand in order to be helpful to people's learning, and sport is really all about learning as well. It is education. One must be authentic and applied. We need to take our theoretical concepts and actually use them, learn how to make them our own. You can learn only within a very caring and community-based environment. So we uphold this idea of a community, learning community, or a cohort community. And the importance of transformation, that transformational learning means that we have to have the courage to confront previous assumptions and explore new ways of doing and being. And once we have experienced this personal transformation, we're a much better place to support the transformation of others. this little acronym, I love it, Applied Caring and Transformation Act. It's all about action. We're Changemaker University, and we really do launch people into the world ready to facilitate transformation. We also have a beautiful prior learning assessment approach to recruiting and enrolling people into our programs, and that we acknowledge professional work experience. That counts for athletes as well. So I've welcomed many athletes into our programs and honored their professional experience as international athletes competing, training, and operating on the world stage. We also have partnerships with places like the CFL, where we work with them to offer sport leadership programming, and we're working on a micro-credential right now and a grad cert in sport leadership as well. And that's how the webinar series was really born, this idea, the intersection of sport, leadership, and social change. Sport, like climate, like arts, offers just so much learning to everyone. So let's dig in. And today we're going to be looking at bringing it back to sport. You know, sport is like everything. It can fall victim to commodification, commercialization. And we can fixate on that medal table and those shiny objects, but really, what's sport really about? So today we'll be talking about all the beauty of sport, bring it back to the foundation of sport, discuss what it represents, what it offers, but also the life and leadership lessons that it offers us through difficult times, through joyous times, but everything in between as well. And I have two wonderful guests, Becca Zimmerman from rowing. I mean, she's done a million other things, obviously, but her sport pedigree is long and strong. Silver both in the 2017 and 2018 World Championships. She has a sparkling varsity background as well as a rower, and I'm sure has had other successes in other kinds of sports, but we'll hear more about that from Becca herself. We also welcome Sophie DeGoede, rugby, but also basketball player, multi-sport athlete, and a couple of her highlights recently, a bronze in the 2024 Sevens Series, Rugby Sevens in Vancouver. I was there to watch, it was great, and the gold in the Pacific 415 Series. So that multi-sport athlete shining through in that she plays both sevens and 15s. And let's dig in. Remind people that you can pose your questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring, or if you have comments, you know, sometimes we invite people in to be part of the conversation. We have, you know, quite a few people, actually more than I expected today. We're recording, of course, so the recording goes out to the hundreds that have registered, and that's often how it is. It is downloaded. So let's dig in. Welcome, everybody. A few more people have joined. That's great to see some familiar names. Hi, Sue. Hi, Walter. Excellent. All right, so let's start. I always like to start by asking you to introduce yourself a little bit further. And I'll also introduce Ariana. She's up in the top corner there, so I want to make sure I shine a light on Ariana, who's been a real partner in this webinar project for many, well, probably a year now. Hey, Ariana, it's going on and on, but there's always something to talk about, isn't there? So thank you always to Ariana for all of her support. Okay, so I like to start by asking, tell us a little bit about your road to sport. What brought you to sport? What drew you to sport? And then, of course, what keeps you involved in sport? Because, you know, I know, Becca, you're still helping out with coaching, and who knows what your future is. Why don't we start with you, Becca, and then give Sophie a breath.
Sure. What brought me to sport? Well, I actually remember, this is kind of funny, the 96 Olympics. I remember watching Donovan Bailey win the gold medal in the 100-meter. And I remember doing a school project being like, I want to go to the Olympics for sprinting. And that was never in the cards for me. And I sort of dabbled in sports throughout high school. Like I was on the swim team all through high school and medaled provincially with that. Um, and I also started rowing in high school and at a very small club in Toronto called Bayside Rowing Club, which is very humble beginnings for me. Like I rowed the single, we didn't have a boathouse, and I always and I remember like my coach had a wall of fame of former athletes of his who had gone on to the national team, and I was like, you know, that would be really cool. And but you know, I'm a shorter rower. I'm 5'8", and that's short in that world. And I had a lot of people say that's not in the cards for me. So then I continued my rowing career at UVic, which has like a very significant legacy in Olympic rowing, and many UVic rowers have gone on to be on the national team and go on to the Olympics. And when I was reaching the end of my varsity career in 2017, I decided, I'm going to give this kind of one last shot. There's this nice kind of opening after an Olympic year, and there's a turnover of athletes, and there was some spots open, and I went to, it's called a speed order, and you have to race and get invited to a selection camp, and then you go through many days of racing and combinations, and then at the end of that I got the invite to go to London, which is where the National Training Center was at that time, and that was sort of the very beginning of my rowing career, which was exciting because a lot of people had said that's wasn't going to be in the cards for me. And I had, some success very early on, and won a silver medal at the 2017 World Championships and the 2018 World Championships. I was the spare for the Tokyo Olympic team, which obviously, with some time and perspective, is an achievement in and of itself. But at the time, it doesn't necessarily feel like that. It feels like kind of a failure. But and that in itself was a very difficult experience. Just with There was a teammate of mine who had a very last minute injury, and I was very close to being in the boat. It was a decision that was made a week before the Olympics started, and so I had to go home, unfortunately. And then, they proved what I knew they could prove, and they ended up winning a gold medal in Tokyo, which is something that I'm very proud to be a part of. I continued rowing after that, and raced at the 2022 and 2023 World Championships in the women's four. And then recently retired from high performance rowing in March. We unfortunately only qualified the women's 8 for Paris, and so there wasn't a ton of opportunity. And it was a very small team, and it wasn't in the cards for me to be in that boat, and now I'm retired.
Thanks so much. And we'll come back to the questions of, what are some of the why sport? What kind of drew you in to go so long? What do you love most about it? What does it represent? But let's flip to Sophie and hear more about her pathway into sport as well.
Yeah, I was really fortunate in that I had two very strong role models in my parents for high performance sports. So my mom was our first national women's team captain and was with the team for 10 years. And my dad was our first national 15s team captain in a World Cup in 1987 and was the captain, or at least with the team, for 13 years. So I had these really strong role models already. Like as early as I can remember, I wanted to follow my parents' footsteps and play for the national team. So along the way, like in elementary school, I remember Simon Whitfield came and talked to our class. And so that's when the Olympics kind of got on my radar, in Vancouver 2010 as well, being from Victoria. I remember being in bed and my mom coming to check on me and before bed, and she was like, okay, we're just gonna hang out tomorrow. Like we talked about go to the Olympic Games, but it wasn't probably gonna work out just with the ferry schedule and stuff. And then I guess I don't remember, I was 10 years old, but I guess I was like looked so incredibly disappointed and sad that we rearranged our whole week to make it work so we could go over to Vancouver for a couple of days. And I think we had to take, Rugby Canada has an agreement with Helijet, so my parents were on the board at the time, so we got to take the helijet in over the Olympic flame, and it was just the most incredible experience. So that's kind of when the Olympics got on my radar, because rugby at that time was not yet in the Olympics, and certainly not rugby 15s, which has always been my main focus, is not an Olympic sport, just because of the toll it takes on your body. So it needs a minimum of 6 weeks to play a tournament. Yeah, and then women's rugby sevens got into the Olympics, well, women's and men's in 2016 Rio, and our women won a bronze medal, which was huge. And I was 15 or 16 and just starting to crack national age grade teams at that time. And so it was really important and helpful for me to have such strong role models literally in my backyard. They're centralized in Victoria. That's where I was growing up, going to school, and literally training alongside them. So yeah, like I said, I've always had really strong role models all the way along. And then at the time, I was also playing basketball and soccer and volleyball and track and cross country, and I rode a bit in high school. And then I decided to go and leave the sevens program. I was just in a development stage, and I wanted to go to university, and it wasn't going to work for me to go to university while in the sevens program. So I left and went to Queen's University, did my commerce degree, and played basketball and rugby on the varsity team at that time, and then started my senior national team career with the 15s team. And then went to World Cup, captained the 15s team at the World Cup in 2021 in New Zealand. We came fourth, and then came back into the sevens environment in sort of the last year or two, and made the Olympic team, and then tore my ACL 1 week later. So didn't get to go to the Olympics. So it's kind of a similar story to Becca in that you're part of the Olympic team, but you're not competing with the team on the day. And our team did really well and won the silver in Paris. So that's been kind of I guess a bittersweet, I don't even know what you'd call it, journey experience for me in the last couple of months. Like 2 weeks or 2 months now out of tearing my ACL. So yeah, it's kind of, hopefully we'll come full circle and we'll be back for the LA Olympics, but that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm 25 years old, so hopefully got a few more years left in my career, but we'll want to stay involved in sport afterwards as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and interesting, because I think I was conceiving of this before some of these events had unfolded, and part of the Olympics too has unfolded in interesting ways. And both teams, rugby and rowing, have earned a silver, which is pretty cool to see. Yeah, and lots of supportive comments in the chat here as well that you'll notice. I want to come back to lots of good things there around the role models and the power of the importance of education through your sport journey. And I was laughing, Becca, when you were talking about looking at, like, I'm going to be a sprinter. I was thinking the same thing when I was 7, and I would like time myself around the block.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm only a minute off of whatever 100
Yeah,
meter
that's
thing.
nothing. You're good.
You're so confident as a kid. And this idea, yeah, of the role models. Love it so much. So tell us a little more about, what makes sport important? What have you kind of valued most about it? Whoever's ready, go ahead, Becca.
I think, I mean, being in sport, and especially being in high performance sport, you sort of build all these subjective characteristics of like time management and work ethic and those soft skills. But I think it also, for me at least, I've come to the realization recently, is it taught me a lot about myself, like things already about myself that didn't come from sport, but it revealed it, just in my sense of self. And because you go through some of the most challenging and difficult situations, and you somehow manage to get through them, and yeah, for me, I learned a lot, but it also has taught me a lot about myself, um, which has, yeah, been very interesting.
Yeah, it keeps you coming back, right? It's so almost, I hate the word addictive, but it's tough to let go of that kind of opportunity to learn and discover more and more. And I love that visual of it revealing yourself. Hey, you start to really notice what you're capable of, or qualities that are inherent. Beautiful. How about you, Soph? What makes it
Yeah,
important?
I think you could go two routes with it, and that there's not one thing that makes it important. There's a myriad of things, but one for me is the team aspect, and I know rowing's a team sport to an like as well as rugby, and I think being able to understand how you interact with other people and relationship building, and then I think the connections that you make through sport that then last on in life. And I know I'm young, but I've seen that modeled through my parents. Like just last week we had friends coming over that my mom had played rugby with. So I think the lasting connections is one thing, but to go more into Becca's point, I think that you learn so much about yourself and what you're kind of sport gives you an avenue to push yourself and to see what the limits of your human potential are, and to try to break those. And I think that there's something so rewarding in pushing yourself to that point or beyond that point. And you learn so much about intent and consistency and things that will pay off down the road in life, but also just the pursuit of something like of this perfection that you know is unattainable is so, I don't know, as a competitor, that's so thrilling to me, and that's so exciting as an individual. And so I think that for me, having an avenue just to push myself as hard as I can and really see what I'm capable of is, I couldn't ask for more. And I think sport's the best vehicle for me to do that through.
So complete, you know, it's, yes, physical, tactical, technical, but it's that, and then,
Yeah, it gives you like, it's so meta and philosophical, but it gives you a real opportunity to live and like see and just put yourself out there and see what you're really capable of and be vulnerable to fail, and but also just to try to achieve whatever you can. And I think like what else are we here for if not to try to push ourselves and see what we're capable of and try to reach that maximum potential of ourselves.
learn. And the idea of vulnerability. I want you to both think a little bit about stories that you have of those discoveries, things you've discovered about yourself. Give us a bit of context, you know, when did it happen? What happened? Or when things were really like disappointing, but you had to handle it. You've both shared an instance, but anything. Those moments when you do, when I always like to, I love that. It's from a poem, but you know, you almost touch the face of God, like that perfection, you experience a glimmer of it, you know. I always say I have like a couple of really great strokes every row out of 1,000, but where it's just close, right? And you share some examples.
Sophie, do you want to go first? That's
Yeah,
such a deep, profound question.
I think if I try to take an example of our World Cup team, we came fourth, and we were the only amateur team to finish in the top four, because Rugby Canada, I always say, it's not for a lack of wanting to, but we just don't have the resources to pull from that the other nations do. So we can't be contracted as professionals through our national union on the 15 side. So we were going to have, in the build up to World Cup, we were going to have about 15 days together. And our competitors in England, France, New Zealand were at an average of about 60 days together. And we were expected to perform at the same level. And we knew we had, again, like this potential to reach the same level and to beat those teams, but we just didn't have the amount of time together. So we did what we call the soft centralization, where we funded ourselves to we went out to Halifax for an extended period of time. So we ended up having about somewhere around 40 days together on average, to actually find those connections and develop as a team. But that was all self-funded. We were put up by the Halifax rugby community, just billeting, like making our own lunches, buying stuff from Costco, trying to save money wherever we could. People quit jobs to come out because this decision was made in, you know, about 2 months out from World Cup, because we realized how much further we needed to go in that amount of time. And then I think seeing all the sacrifices that we made there start to pay off. And against England, we had a really, really strong performance in the semifinal. And we were so close to kind of reaching that potential, and we just fell short. And I think the contrast of like that real disappointment, but then seeing the public back home talking about everything that we had accomplished was a difficult one to swallow, because we hadn't accomplished what we wanted to. And so it was almost frustrating to see people say, oh, but you played so well, because we didn't win. But then I think in time, I started to see how much that process meant, and just how much being in our community meant for that period of time. And then just even running England close, how much that meant to the people back home. And now we get to make a real push for this next World Cup. We beat New Zealand a couple months ago, which was huge. The first time Canada's ever beat New Zealand with the national 15s program. So I think we're starting to track in the right direction, and it's hopefully really exciting that we'll see that process outcome this time around, and see the development of the team.
And I love that word development. I feel like it's so milquetoast, but it really is, right? Seeing the development, seeing how far you'd come, and having those markers that aren't always medals, they're not always made of gold, but they are really important.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Good to hear about that. How about you, Becca? You got a story?
Yeah, so prior to the Tokyo Olympics last quad, the Canadian women's rowing team was in a very toxic training environment, and we had a head coach who was ultimately fired in the March before the original Olympic Games in 2020, or before the postponement. And at that moment in time, we didn't trust each other, and we didn't trust as teammates, because we had just been sort of pitted against each other. And I actually do think that the COVID postponement was the best thing that could have happened to us, because we were likely on our way to a participation medal at the Olympics at that point, because we just were not in a position to we were very fit, but we just couldn't come together as a unit, just with everything that we had been through in the environment. And so that extra year, Michelle Darvell, who took over the program after that coach was let go, we used that time to really come together as a team. And we were a team of 14, and we just knew that we were good enough and we had the right people to be very successful. But we just kind of had to move past everything that had happened. And it was very hard. I mean, it took a lot of work to trust each other again. But to be a part of that, and to be a part of that group success, ultimately we won a gold medal and a bronze medal on the squad. And that I don't think would have been possible without the postponement, and that time to kind of reevaluate everything and come back together as a team. I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Qualified a lot of crews too. Yeah.
Qualified, I mean, as a whole squad, we qualified 10 crews, but specifically in our group, we had an 8, a 4, and a pair, which is all of the women's sweep events, and then ultimately medaled in 2 of those. But it was the transformation of the squad between 2020 originally, when the Olympics were supposed to happen, versus the 2021 Olympic team was, even though it was the same people, it was dramatically different.
We're going to dig into that a little bit. What do you think was fundamental to the shift? What ultimately helped the team come together? What was the process, or what were the potential factors?
I think Michelle brought out the best in each person, and instead of she was very, very good at saying, because there's 8 people in a boat, but those 8 people bring all these different qualities. And so when you're going into a race, you can't sit there and be like, I'm going to try and do everybody else's job. I just need to do my job in the boat. I'm sitting in stroke seat, or I'm sitting in 2 seat. And I implicitly and completely trust the people in front and behind me. They're doing their best and more. And so I allow, like, I'm going to give them the freedom and space to do that. And that gives me the freedom and space to do it myself. Because if you take on too much and you don't trust those around you, like that's when you see those crews that don't really have that cohesiveness, and like it's obvious to look at.
It is, isn't it? And it damages you, right? You end up kind of injured or because you're holding too much. Sounds a lot like rugby. I mean, just I didn't play rugby, but I love it. I love watching it. But that trust, I mean, you just can't be everywhere, can you? And you really have to trust all those different roles. Can you tell us a little bit about that,
Yeah, I
Sophie?
think it's interesting learning from rowing a bit, because it seems to me like, oh, you're all moving in the same direction, you're all in the same boat, you're doing the same movement, but it's pretty neat to understand all the different intricacies of what the different positions mean. In rugby, it's a bit more obvious, even just looking at body types around the different roles that people play. And I really love that about our sport, in the way that um, the physicality, the size is really important. And then for others, it's more the speed. And you could both be, starting and playing a really important role depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think the other really interesting thing about rugby, and the way that it builds trust and bonds people, is that you're literally putting your body on the line for your teammates. And so my teammate gets tackled, goes down on the ground. It's my responsibility to be right there over top of her, protecting her and the ball, and taking hits from the opposition and holding my ground over top of her while she's in a weak and vulnerable position, and protecting her and the possession. And I think having that kind of like genuinely putting your body on the line, again, like showing some sort of vulnerability and pushing through it, and showing your strength for your teammate, in in an unglamorous way sometimes, it really bonds people. And I think that's why you see like rugby teams are often really, really close, just because they are protecting each other on the field.
Yeah, it's like an inherent principle, hey, and how many times, you almost set yourself up to be smashed,
Yeah,
setting the other person up
release someone else. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
catch that ball and have the free run, but or will you go and leap up and to catch it, knowing you're gonna get taken out.
Yeah.
But yeah, wow, it is really quite a sacrificial kind of sport. I love it. And the trust and the bond, beautiful, beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you both mentioned education, right? And both of you have accomplished a degree while you've been competing at the highest of levels. How important, how did you do that? Do you think it's essential? What are your perspectives on that?
Like education is essential to sport or vice versa.
Yeah, getting your degree, because more and more we see a push toward total centralization, and Sophie experienced it where there wasn't the option to go to school. You're either, and hockey players experience at a young age, they're centralized, they're playing, there's no time to go to school. What do you think about that? Both of you have taken the path of getting your education, getting a degree.
Yeah. So rowing is set up in a way where we're centralized, like full time, and it's very difficult to pursue any kind of education, at least in how it's currently set up. And so, I mean, generally rowers tend to be a bit older, and so the expectation is that you're kind of done your education before you then centralize and go full time with the national team. I don't know. It's very hard to balance school with training, I will say, but I especially now with the move up to Duncan, it makes education even less accessible. Um, yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily the best move, and I understand there's a ton of reasons around the move, and it's not just the education piece, but you're putting so many parts of your life on hold, to pursue the national team, and that's a sacrifice every athlete is willing to make. But I think just in terms of athlete retention and keeping people around for that second, third Olympics, uh, that education piece and just life outside of sport, it's very important to developing as a person, obviously, but I think it also impacts your development as an athlete. Just having perspective and balance, and yeah, just things that when you're so siloed in the training environment, when you're centralized like that, I think anything that pulls you outside of it is actually very beneficial.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be distracting. It can give you perspective, right? And help sort of ground you. What do you
Yeah,
think? So, what's your perspective?
I would agree. I think it depends on the individual. I mean, some people aren't don't want to pursue education, and that's totally fine. Like they probably, but I do think that pursuing something else outside of sport is really beneficial. And for me, I think education was so helpful, and just, you have to show up on time to class or you're not allowed into class. And I think even little things like that, just a sense of maturity. And we miss that sometimes as we see younger people coming into our programs, our senior programs, that haven't necessarily done their education or haven't finished it or are straight out of high school or whatever. And I think then it's almost harder for them to integrate themselves within the senior program because they're learning all these lessons, and there's less give. Like there's less give when you're with a senior national team. You have to be on it from the start. And I think being able to do your education, you learn some of those lessons, those life lessons, just naturally through the university system. I also think, as Becca was saying, perspective is really valuable. And when you're so siloed and narrow focused into one thing and one aspect of your life, it becomes your identity. And when something goes well, great, like the world's going well. But if something goes poorly, your life's crashing down around you and you have no other outlet and no other perspective of the fact that the world's still turning and people are living their day-to-day lives. And sports not the be all end all, even though it is, for us, it is like it's a be all end all in terms of like we always wanted to be involved in our lives, and we think it's incredibly valuable. But that one performance maybe, or that one competition, is not the be all end all. And yeah, I think education, or as I said, some other pursuit gives you that perspective. And I think it also shows you things like relationships with your coach. If you've had a relationship with a professor, or you have work experience and you've had a relationship with a boss, you understand that, sometimes they're going to have to speak to you harshly, and you've got to take that and take on that constructive criticism and not take it personally. And other times you need to stick up for yourself and show your value and how you want to be treated. So I think, again, you start to understand relationships, give and take, and all these life skills through education that are really valuable in sport, just as sport skills teach you valuable life lessons and vice versa.
That just reminded me, we used to joke that the age that you entered the national team and the training center, we would call it the fountain of youth, because the age that you enter is like your mental and emotional maturity until you leave.
Yeah, yeah. You
So I
just
think
was on
education would help with that.
Yeah, so great. Awesome. I meant to mention it, but you were talking about the trust that's built amongst the team, and such a measure of success, really like a key factor to success as a team is that level of trust and bond connection. Because, and I think trust just allows you to focus too, right, on your own job or play the way you need to play. But there's some research done by Zach Lewis, you'd know him, Becca, but out at
Yeah.
Brock, where you actually feel less pain when you're operating in sync with people. So he did it with rowers on ergometers, rowing machines, and people felt less pain when they were not just rowing together, but actually in sync. Pretty cool. So you can be in sync in lots of different ways. Doesn't mean you have to be doing exact same thing, but in sync in terms of your strategy or your mindset. Or wonderful, hey?
Yeah, I think I've learned a lot about trust through captaining the team, and I think getting into that role, I thought I was ready for it, and then I realized there was so much I didn't know, and like I was maybe 20% ready for it. And I think what you're saying in terms of being in sync in different ways, I always thought like just being in sync on the field was enough, and that I was a good captain and could lead people well in training and in competition. But I've learned that being in sync off field is actually probably more important for establishing trust, because on field you don't have a lot of time. You have to be direct and be able to say things in short ways and get communication across quickly, and sometimes even non-verbally. And so the work to establish those relationships is usually done off field. And when I first got into the role, I didn't invest enough time in building that in sync relationship to establish the trust off field. And I think just to build off what you're saying, that's another way that we can be in sync, not physically but mentally, that is sometimes overvalued, as just like playing cards on the, when you get back from your training and just continuing to spend time together.
And I can imagine people, well, I can imagine you, Soph, actually, feeling like, yeah, that's, I'm very focused on getting this work done, and that's all kind of nice to have, but not necessary. So you can imagine a lot of people would have that attitude, but recognizing, oh, it actually has a lot of value. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a direct correlation to your performance, all that fluffy stuff.
All that fluffy stuff. Hey, that's Railroads, instead of calling it soft skills, we call them core skills.
There you go.
Ooh, I'm gonna put that on my resume.
Boom, core skills, because they are so central. Okay. Oh, lovely. Okay. And now how about sport? So sport, you can see how it's developing human beings, developing teams, helping people build relationships. So we're still kind of talking individually, and how these athletes can, of course, be real societal assets in the end. You can see it in the two of you. You represent so much out there in the world and bring so much to so many people. How important is sport for society? Like, a lot of people kind of think, well, whatever, sport. It's, again, a nice to have, but it's not necessary. What are your thoughts on that? What value does it bring to the world?
I mean, I think we can sort of see every 4 years how much the country comes together for the Olympics. That's sort of the obvious example that I can think of. But yeah, just having, even if I mean, if I had it my way, that's the kind of support that we would get, every year at World Championships and all that. But yeah, it's so nice to see everyone rallying around sports they've never even heard of in the Olympic year. So it's a very short answer to that question, but
That's fine. What's it mean? What do you think? Why do we need it in the world? Why is it of any value?
Too, on a non-high performance level, I
Okay.
think that a lot of change makers in life later on have played sport at a young age, whether it was competitively or not, and learned all those values they were talking about of teamwork and accountability and intent and consistency and showing up for yourself and for others. And I've doing my business degree and also just starting to gain work experience, most of the people that I'm encountering in those different roles have some connection to sport, and that's helped them find their ambition, it's helped them find their drive, it's helped them I guess learn all those skills again at a young age. And so I think that you might not see it as a direct correlation to sport, but a lot of the changes that we see in society, or the people that are driving society along, have learned really valuable lessons through playing sport. And it's not an easy story to tell, because you'd need stats to back it up, and it's not easy for the public to see that there's a direct correlation to sport. But I think if you went and interviewed a lot of C-suite executives, they would tell you that they learned some really valuable lessons through sport that they continue to use to this day.
Yeah, and I think there are some stats on that. I think it's Ernst & Young, right? And they found that 94% of women who end up in these leadership roles have a sport background. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so there's the Olympics happening, and it's exciting, it's invigorating. People are distracted from work for a while. It's funny because there's actually research to show that people's activity levels actually decrease because everybody's on the couch watching. But it does have this effect, long-term effect on inspiring. You see the little kids suddenly trying things or wanting to sign up for programs because they're all inspired by, like you, Donovan Bailey or Simon Whitfield or someone like that. And what else? What other value having this kind of games that's global, a world championships, a World Cup? Of what value is that kind of high performance level sport to a society, do you think? Is it important? What would happen if it went away?
I think it's a way of,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
of unifying the world in a way. And there's a lot of like political things around the Olympic Games as well, for sure. I don't want to discount that, but there's so many geopolitical conflicts happening in our world right now, and there always have been. And I think the Olympics is a way that we can put that all on pause and compete as nations in a really productive and enjoyable to watch way. And I think to have the world, and I know the world's not on pause, I'm not trying to glorify the Olympics to that extent, but just to have everyone watching and cheering for their countries and in a good sense of national pride that's working in a positive direction versus in being in conflict all the time. I think that's a really good like microcosm of what the world could be in in an overly idealistic way, maybe.
Yeah, and really demonstrating some of the things you've shared personally that you've gotten from sport, but putting that on display for the world to see as well. Beautiful. And the media is doing a good job, I think, of highlighting some of the challenging aspects, but also a lot of the great stories. Yeah. What do you think, Becca?
I was just going to say something similar. I mean, you get to interact with people from countries that you never likely would, and it just puts you on common ground with people you never would have crossed paths with and never would, or likely don't have much, or you think you don't have much in common with them, but it turns out you do. And yeah, it's that perspective piece again. It gives you like just perspective of the world around you and exposes you to things you really wouldn't normally be exposed to.
In my crew, I have a crew of four. Well, I was part of the eight, but the four was kind of the core crew, and two of them married internationally. Other rowers, right? Shenanigans going on, but it's true, right? Those wonderful cross international relationships that are built, and it's true. I think sometimes, people don't get that view into international events to see that there is so much um, connecting actually really going on, and that we are playing peacefully and getting to know one another. Yeah. Now let's talk a bit about the challenging aspects of sport though too. We had, when I was writing the questions up and thinking about this, we just had the drone scandal happen. Now there have been many more since then, different things that have happened that have been really unfortunate or that have kind of blown up. The boxing one is another one that people are talking about. The attendance of the Dutch convicted felon, that was really tough for people. And then things like Mo Ahmed getting, falling, tripped, but then, four guys are tripped later and then they get in, but he doesn't get in. And those really tough things, right? We've all experienced those in sport. What are some thoughts that you've been having about any one of those issues that have arisen during the games?
When the drone scandal sort of really took off, I just like my heart went out to the players because they had would have no say or control over that situation, but this thing that they've worked for their whole lives is now tainted and ruined because of decisions that people above them have made. And I think you said this in the invite to this talk, was that it's the athletes that ultimately have to pay the price. And yeah, it really just gets away from the spirit of the Olympics, and yeah, just puts the onus on the players who had nothing to do with those decisions.
And man, did they ever step up? Yeah.
Mhm.
What is the spirit of the Olympics?
I think fair play and just like sport at its truest level and competition and respect for each other. Yeah. And yeah, I don't think that was the case when someone decided to fly a drone over somebody else's practice. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's just something that happens and they were the ones that got caught, but
Doesn't matter.
yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, and it doesn't make it right? So what are we doing here? Okay, thanks. And if you think of more things, go for it. Sophie, what do you think? What are some reflections you've been having?
Yeah, I've been, I don't know, I haven't been like super, because it's been a bit hard not being there. I haven't been super in tune with everything that's going on in the Olympic world right now. Um, I did hear a lot about the drone scandal, and I would probably echo most of what Becca said, and it's just frustrating, and I imagine devastating as an athlete to then have to pay the price. And yeah, it's just not in the spirit of what we're trying to compete after, and everything that we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes around like what you learn from sport and honesty and discipline and accountability and all that. And then when you go against the grain, it feels like, well, it is cheating, and it feels like as an athlete and as a fan of sport, like you're being cheated on a bit in terms of like just being betrayed by your own staff, because you get so close with your staff, and they follow you through these journeys, and they go through the ups and downs with you, and um to then have them be doing to have them be cheating behind your back, and then putting your own games and your own dreams that you thought you were striving for together at risk, is, I just imagine that I would feel quite betrayed as an athlete, and that would be a really tough pill for me to swallow, considering if I put myself in their shoes, how close I am with our staff members, and how they become, you become a family, and so I think that would be a really difficult hurdle to try to get over, and the fact that they did and came so close to well, they got out of their pool and then came so close to beating Germany is pretty remarkable.
But a burden, right? Carrying a burden all the way along. And yeah, the betrayal of trust, and really like communicating to the athletes that you don't fully believe in them, that
Yeah,
you're resorting to cheating, like always so dangerous,
yeah.
because it just undermines all the confidence you've been working to build. Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't think I want to go there next. I've got another question that's quite,
Maybe for the end, I guess.
yeah, I'll save it. Um, I'd like to ask you a bit more about leaders. You've both mentioned role models, people that have inspired you, or kind of instigated your path down the journey of sport. What is it about those people, do you think, that has really imprinted on you, or what are some qualities that you've been admiring the most? What do you think are just essential to great leadership in sport? Obviously not cheating is good. What else?
I think leading, like some leaders, maybe their leadership style is being more vocal, but leading by example and just leading through your actions mean a lot to me, and doing what you say you're gonna do, I think goes a very, very long way. Um, Either in looking for a leader or being a leader. Yeah, just being accountable to the things that you say. That just builds that underlying level of trust, I think, and just respect more than anything. Yeah.
And I'll push you both just to get thinking about stories of that, examples of that, people you've met that you've thought, wow, even if they aren't your coach specifically, but you've watched someone else over your careers, people on the team. Because I love that quote by Richie McCaw where there are 15 people on the field for a 15's team game, and there's one captain, but then there are 15 leaders. Like everybody really needs to step up and lead on the pitch. Love that concept, and that the captain has specific responsibilities. And I think in organizations, I proclaim that concept quite often when I'm working with the organizations, that sure, there's a president, CEO, director, whatever, and they have responsibilities and roles, but there's a leadership all the way across, and needs to be across any environment. So examples are welcome as well. What do you think, Sophie, about what are some qualities that you admire or that have been really impactful for you?
Yeah, I think off what Becca said, the number one thing is that you do your job as a leader, and like personally on the field or in the boat or whatever. I don't know if that's 70% or 80% of being a leader. I couldn't, but I think it's a really important part is that you're doing that first, and that establishes trust and respect in your role. But then I think to go off an example also around how the team is always above the self. When I first got my captaincy role, I was 22 at the time, so very young to be in that role and quite inexperienced because I'd been on the team for 2.5 years, but a year plus of that had been COVID. And we were 6 months out from World Cup at this point. So it was a pretty crucial time to probably have a more experienced leader. And the previous captain, Olivia DeMerchant, had been with the team through 2 World Cup cycles and was a really seasoned and well-respected veteran. So when I learned that I was going to be captain, she was my first call to see how she was feeling about the decision and yeah, basically check in with her. And I think uh she was very honest with me around like what her reservations were, but also what she thought I could bring and where we needed to go. And I think just the way that she was so genuine with me around like, Sophie, I think sometimes you can be a bit of a people pleaser, and I need you to make sure that you're advocating on behalf of the team, and just kind of hit me with what I needed, but also reassured me that she thought I was going to do a really good job and that she was always there to support me. And I leaned on Olivia and other previous captains that were in that squad a lot for those 6 months and beyond still. And I think leadership by committee has been a really important part of my leadership journey so far. And just having an example like Liv to show me what it meant to put the team above yourself and to not just want titles and accolades for yourself, but to really support whatever was going to be best for the team, and then support the people, like to support someone that was taking a role that was really important and valuable to her, was a really good lesson for me to learn as a young leader.
Oh, yeah, beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And Becca's often been in stroke, which is the rowing kind of, I think
Yeah.
it's imposed on you that, well, you're stroke, so you're the leader. How do you feel about that? What's your interpretation of the role, but also talk more about leaders you admire?
It's very interesting because a lot of the language around being the stroke is that you're leading the team and that you're setting the rhythm. But what a lot of, I mean, unless you've kind of sat in the seat, you wouldn't really know that, like, I am responding to what everyone else is doing behind me, and that's how I set the rhythm. If I'm not being followed in a way that is helpful, like, there's not a lot that I can do to change the rhythm because I'm just picking up the rhythm of what's happening behind me. And that, I think that's kind of how I view leadership, is that um a great leader like highlights the skills of those around them and lets them shine. And I just thought of this story, but Michelle Darville, who coached the women's 8 to a gold in Tokyo, was quite good at that. And maybe not a lot of people know this, but before the women's final in Tokyo, she actually didn't give their pre-race talk. Like, she let Terry Paul do it, who was the men's coach at the time, because she knew, this is not my strength. Like, I am going to let someone step in who is going to be the best at it. And that, it just highlights, like, being a leader is not about being the one to do it. It's just kind of letting people be the best version of themselves and shining in their own way, kind of thing.
Love it. Like Liv, right? Sophie's example. Yeah, beautiful.
I'm just gonna have to step out for 1 minute. I'll be right
back. Okay, no worries, Becca. Yeah, and I've been in that role of stroke as well, and it is interesting what people expect that role is. And I think across the world, we impose that expectation on leaders of any kind, that you're somehow this kind of dominant force, or you're the loudest, or you're going to tell everybody what to do. But of course, it isn't that way at all. And yeah, tell me more about what you think being a leader on the field, whether you're in the role of captain or not, really involves?
I think we discount listening in our communication as leaders. And as you're saying, we always think about the delivery of the pregame speech and the directness on the field and how you're in rugby, how you're speaking to the referee and how you're, I don't know, yeah, directing your team in training. But I think the aspect that we don't talk about enough is like how much you need to be a good listener to be a leader, to actually understand where your team is at, where individuals are at, how they might be feeling, trying to be empathetic to a non-selection, to an injury, to a conflict among teammates or among coaches and staff, and to really have your finger on the pulse and then actually resonate with people when you are doing the talking part aspect of communicating. You need to listen first. And so yeah, learning to let other people speak before you do your talk or you come in with your opinion, I think has been really helpful for me to learn, because otherwise people, if they see you as a leader, they just tend to default to the opinion that you gave, and then you don't get the perspective of everyone involved. So I think genuinely being quiet and listening is a really good part of leadership that we don't highlight very often.
Right. Yeah, coming back to that concept of pulling together what's the best from everybody. And I struggle too with this decision maker making the tough decisions in organizational speak, because like you, I think it's about pulling together the best decision or the best option, or leveraging what strengths you have within the environment. Examples of, Becca gave us a great example of a decision that someone made to bring in this other person that they knew would ignite the team in a productive way. What are some other wonderful things you've seen in your experience in sport that were just real turning points or effective decisions that benefited the team, that you admired? Things coming up for you? Or favorite moments in a race, I've got a great one with Leslie Thompson, who coxed us back in the day, and we were second at the Worlds and close to the Russians, but it felt impossible to beat them. We had maybe, 5 strokes left or something. But she said, and this was not in the race plan, but she said, they're dying. And it's so negative and horrible, but at the same time, it was just what we needed to hear to realize there was a chance. Go for it, that you might be doubting. And she just knew exactly there was a bit of doubt in our heads. And she gave us the message we needed, which was there's still a chance. And sure enough, we got them by, a couple inches. So that split decision, that ability to read the room, to listen or pay attention, and then shift things.
I think recently when we beat New Zealand for the first time ever, as I said, our coach Kevin is a super, got an engineering background. He's a super detail oriented, focused planner, and he has just thrown detail at us since he's been our coach in the last 18 months or so, and we've developed so much in our tactical and technical understanding, and we have really specific game plans, really specific practice plans, and premeditated plays, like for the next 3 or 4 phases. This is what we're going to do. This is where everyone's going to be. If you're a meter off, you'll hear about it, that type of thing. And in the week before our New Zealand game, he told me ahead of time, he said, I'm going to stop coaching after, the game was on Sunday. He said, I'm going to stop coaching after Tuesday. So he just he gave us the drills, he ran practice in terms of like a management way, but he wasn't giving any detailed feedback. He wasn't giving specifics. He was letting us figure it out on our own. And I think maybe similar to rowing, like you can't call a timeout mid-race. You can't call a timeout mid-game in rugby. You only have a check-in at halftime with your coach. And even then, it's you that needs to be accountable for figuring things out on the field and for adjusting your game plan or your race plan or whatever adaptations you need to make to how the opposition's coming at you. And I think Kevin finally in that week felt like we were at a place where we could do that ourselves. And I think him showing that trust in us and then us having those few days to just figure it out ourselves really modeled what it was going to be like in the game on the weekend. And when New Zealand got up 2 tries on us, we didn't panic. We stayed pretty calm. We stopped them getting in before the half, and then we found our way through the game on our own. And I think his lack of detail, like going against the grain and going against his innate way of thinking and way of coaching, showed his trust in us, whether that's how he meant for it to happen or not. But that decision to stop coaching after Tuesday actually led to the best result we've ever had in our history.
Well, I'm going to reach out to him and get an interview in. I want to know what the hell. But I bet that's exactly what the plan was. Lay the foundation with the detail. You're all equipped. Now you're starting to sort of sense how ready you are. Then he backs off. Our coach did the same thing, you know, and it wouldn't even really be there on race day, just like Becca was talking about. It doesn't need to be. And in doing so, it's not like they're abandoning you. They're actually communicating such an amazing amount of confidence in you, right?
For sure.
What you, Becca? You got some examples or an example of a?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of different than rugby and like rowing when your coach sort of shoves you off the dock to go warm up before your race, and at that point you're kind of like completely on your own. But um in my experience in the women's 8, you have the coxie who's calling the race plan, but at the same time she's also reading what's happening around us and making calls to respond to other crews, which with the speed of the race, it can stuff can happen in a split second, and the race can change. But I remember in the 2018 World Championships in our final, we were 4th at the halfway point, uh, and we'd not had a great regatta leading up to that, and we had gone in as like the silver medalists from the year before, and we all just had this hunger to like prove that we could do it again. And in the final, she called like with 500 meters to go, which in a women's 8 is about a minute and a half. She decided to call her sprint. She called for a 1 minute max, which is kind of funny because a 500-meter takes about a minute and 30 seconds. And I remember thinking to myself, that's probably one of the only things I remember from the race. Like 500 meters is longer than a minute. Like what's going to happen on the other side of that? Like, am I going to die? But you don't, as soon as the thought entered my brain, it just was gone. And I was like, this is what I'm being asked to do and I'm going to do it. And, you know, with rowing, you have your start and your finish. And then in that middle, you're just riding under this line, like you're completely redlining it. And she knew she was asking a lot and that it was a gamble to get us to like push up above that line with so much of the race left. But it ended up working out, and we passed the Dutch, and then we passed Australia in the last 100 meters, and we ended up winning a silver medal. But yeah, the only thing I can really think of is just that sort of quick thinking of this is not the plan, but right now it's got to be the plan.
Did she tell you after if she had any doubt in giving that command?
No, because I think for her it was also a split second, like just a thing of like we got to go right now, and I don't have a plan for afterwards, but
We'll figure it out in the
we'll
minute.
figure it out when we get there, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And if it works, she knew it would carry you, right? Like you'll be great. Oh, so many great moments in sport out there. I want to take us, we have about 20 minutes. Good. So 2 major topics, and one of them is around, you know, the problems. We're experiencing a lot of problems in Canadian sport. I want to dig into not specifics because both rugby and rowing have gone through independent reviews, have had their stories, have had, you know, Becca gave us examples of a coach getting fired. We've seen, and we've had the same at rugby. More about, you know, in general, what do we see going on in Canadian sport, and where do you see some, I know you've reflected on it, just like I have and many others. What are some of the levers we could pull to make some positive change? And then the last big topic is around some of the most joyful discoveries you've had through sport, some of the hardest discoveries or lessons you've had to learn. You've both shared examples of both these things, but I wanted to kind of finish off with that as well. But let's dig into Canadian sport. You know, we're having a great Olympics in general, other than the drone scandal, but I thought that was just so emblematic of what we just keep coming up against in Canada. And other nations have been facing it for years as well, for probably similar reasons. But what do you think is at the heart of what's going on in Canadian sport?
I mean, I don't really know how to fix it, but because especially for rowing, like there's no private sponsorship or corporate sponsorship. So all of our funding comes from On the Podium, and that is directly related to the number of medals we get at the Olympics. So all of the decision making, as far as I know, I'm an athlete, so I don't know like the nitty gritty, but as far as I know, and from what I saw, all of the decisions around training and coaching and every little thing is, are we going to get a medal or not? Instead of, how can I make these athletes be the best versions of themselves and win a medal that way? Um, yeah, it's almost like the athletes themselves then become expendable in that way, because the bottom line is we have to get a medal. Otherwise, we're not going to have any funding.
And so are you saying kind of lose sight of that developmental aspect of sport? And so what happens if we don't focus on that, or we abandon it somehow in these decisions? What do you think's
Abandon that model of funding?
yeah, development? Oh no, like, so what are you seeing, the decisions that are being made based on medal potential, you know? And I think in Britain they talk about credible sports or credible crews, right, that are going to win a medal. If we make our decisions based on that and not on the development of humans, what's the problem then? What problems is it causing?
I mean, as much as we've seen the success stories of the athletes that end up medaling on that stage, there's a long line of people that are left uh, like just scarred from their experience in sport, um, and kind of want nothing to do with it. And while the medals are great at the end of the day, like there's so many people who are just who I know who are like, I'd never want anything to do with rowing Canada again. Um, and I don't think it has to be that way. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, and you think of these poor soccer players and the scar that's caused, right? That they're going to carry with them. It's always going to be a bit tarnished, that experience at the Olympics, which should have been so great. And you know, I think of Sue's making the comment, we have these two very wise, brilliant people here on the panel, and imagine losing that individual from sport is such a huge tragedy, I think, too.
I think,
So
yeah, I think we have to think like with any problem is like, what is the end goal that we're trying to achieve? And Becca's saying that the funding model right now centers around that end goal being winning medals, but I think the end goal is to inspire Canadians. And when you focus so much on winning medals is a part of that. And as a competitor and a high performance athlete, like that is certainly the goal or part of the goal. But I think if you come back to the ultimate goal is inspiring Canadians, winning medals is a part of it, developing sport advocates is a part of it, having more young children involved in sport, learning sport lessons, having positive examples for the Canadian public of what sport can do. That's beyond the medals. So just the teams being active in the community, things like that. Those all go into inspiring Canadians. And when we go so far on the one lever, then you start getting things that just ends that justify the means, like using a drone to film someone else's practice might help you win a medal if you're not caught. But the risk of getting caught is gonna maybe have less parents putting their kids into sport, not be a positive example for the Canadian public, scar some athletes so they're gonna not want to be advocates for Soccer Canada down the road. Like you lose all these other positive aspects of inspiring Canadians. And I think, yeah, but it's tough because all the funding is based around that one lever. And I find that with 15s, because we're not an Olympic sport, we don't get the OTP funding, and our Sport Canada funding is very limited, if at all. And so do we do the job of inspiring Canadians? Yes. Can we possibly win Olympic medals? No. So we don't get any funding. And I find that really difficult because I think we create our sport. I'm biased, obviously, but our sport has a really positive sport culture, and I think a really positive influence on Canadians and all the different body types that we embrace, etc. And we don't get any funding for that impact that we can have on our Canadian society. So I don't know the fix. I don't know how you fund sport differently, and whether it's through corporate sponsorships rather than government, whether, I don't know, we relate it more to your impact on culture and society, but how do you quantify that? I don't know. It's easy to quantify winning medals and then assign numbers to that and assign dollar values to that. So it's a difficult problem to solve.
Yeah, and it comes up a lot in organizational theory too, around how do we quantify well-being or engagement or commitment or balance, all these things that are core to our organizations and the health of the people working within them. But it's tough to quantify, and we're a bit, although you still can, right? You still can capture those things. So how do we measure success in sport based on impact and well-being of athletes, and how clean and respectful, how true, and the development that we're seeing, all those kind of qualities. So we can push for that. And we can track those things as well. Just like you did, Sophie, earlier when you were describing your experience at the World Cup with 15s and seeing that we were fourth, and it was based on all these things, and we'd come a long way and we'd achieved had all these other accomplishments, and maybe it didn't lead to first, second, third, but it was fourth, which was huge too. And there were measures all the way along. Yeah.
Yeah, and having that visibility, and then like pulling in more participants from a young age, and like who's watching, you can quantify viewership and things like that, but you need to also find a way to get on the TV in the first place. So
Yeah.
it's hard. It's a hard problem.
Well, women have been facing forever, right? And finally we get the opportunity, and guess what? We fill stadiums. It's amazing. So that's also part of it, is proving it wrong, that it's not just the Olympics that are going to inspire or galvanize or pull people in to watch, that there are other qualities. Yeah, cool. All right, I think we've solved it. We just need to get it implemented. All right. And let's end with, hardest lessons, most joyful discoveries, I wrote it as, but lessons that have been really awe-inspiring, and others that have just been really tough, but like you've learned it.
I'd say I'm going through one right now. So I'm looking forward to the joyful discovery on the other end. But yeah, I think it's been really hard to see all your friends and your program do so well, and feel involved in it, but very peripherally. And I think, yeah, we always want to be performing as the athlete, and so to not actually get to have that opportunity to do it makes you feel like you're not really involved in it. So it's been really hard to like wrestle with the bittersweet emotion of not just pure devastation and crush, because it is really positive for our team in the long run to have won a silver. And as we've been talking about, it's going to help our funding. It really increases viewership. I'm sure it inspired many Canadians. It's really good for momentum for our 15s team as well moving forward, because we have a lot of crossover athletes, and for their belief in what we'll be capable of at World Cup. And it's just a really positive experience for your best friends. Like you're simultaneously so happy for the achievement of your best friends on a personal level, and really crushed that I couldn't be there. So I think wrestling with that feeling has been a really big struggle that I've still going through, and feel sometimes you wake up, feel like you're in a bit of a nightmare, or this can't be real, and then other times you have to just radically accept it and face reality, and then think about what positive could come of it and how you'll develop and grow and be a better person, and hopefully athlete as well when you come back. So yeah, I don't really know. I don't know what the joyful discovery is yet, but I'll keep you updated.
I'm sure, and it'll come. It'll come. I was at the Olympics. I mean, all three of us share these sorts of heartbreaking things, and injured just before the races had to withdraw, like make the decision. I wasn't quite healthy enough to race. So luckily though, we had a very experienced person from the other boat that could sit in my boat, steer it, stroke it, do all the things. And she'd been to 2 Olympics already. So I think with that pedigree, she was able to kind of be, and she was terrified because we were world champs and had set a record and everything. So suddenly she's supposed to parachute in and do all these things. But without the gravity of her maturity, I think I would have really put my crew at risk. And that was going to be devastating for me if they didn't win. And then she got in there and made it happen. And I remember watching the end of the race, you know, the Chinese and the US were close, and one other, I think it was the Germans, and they were moving on Canada, you know, they were ahead, but it was really getting close to the line, and I was just losing it. And I realized, like, because I think some people might have been happy if the crew had not won without them, you know what I mean? But to feel that like joy in their success was really kind of validating as a human being. But also just the biggest discovery for me was that all I really worried about was being able to row again. And that was going to be the hardest thing. I actually worried that I'd never row again, that my back was done. And now I'm 59 and I'm rowing again, right? And competing, and it's just wonderful. So I think it'll reveal to you what's most important to you, like any good crisis does. And it'll be a great path of discovery. And you've got such a long life ahead of you. It'll be all good. Okay. Becca, how about you? What are the hardest? And then we'll go to the.
Yeah, I mean, the hardest for me was the Tokyo decision, because I got, like, the accident happened 5 weeks out from the Olympics, and so then I got put in the boat and they said, we don't know if she's going to come back, she's going to get surgery, and we'll see. And I just at that point remember thinking to myself, I have to 100% commit to this, like, emotionally, and think like I'm going to race at the Olympics, because there's a very real chance that I am, but at the same time, there was a very real chance that I wasn't going to, and I just kind of had to say, put that out of my mind and just do it for myself and do it for my teammates and have them be prepared in the best way possible. And as much as it was heartbreaking for me, like, I knew that that was like the ultimate gift that I could give to them, and they did end up winning the gold medal. And it's definitely been a journey in learning to, I'm still grieving it, and I probably always will. But this sense of self that I have, and like just worth that I know that I bring, that beyond sport, I feel like it's going to set me up for the rest of my life. I mean, that is probably the most challenging experience I've ever had, but what I learned about myself through it has been amazing. And you know, I'm recently retired, and I don't know what I'm going to do with my life yet, but I'm so sure that I will do a good job and do well at whatever that is. Like, I'm almost like waiting for the next opportunity so I can jump right in and just apply myself in the same way. And yeah, just as much as the successes like inform that assuredness in myself, the failures did too. Um, and even though sometimes it still hits me like a ton of bricks, and I'm like, wow, that really sucked. Like, yeah, there's just also a peace that comes with it. I actually ran into Jason Dorland, who was also an Olympic rower, and he had his own Olympic heartbreak in 92, I believe.
88.
88, excuse me. And he had heard my story, which it always like is so, I'm like, oh my God, like my little story, that's so funny. But he said to me, he's like, one day you will look at it like it was the best thing that ever could have happened to you. And I'm not there yet. But it helps to know that. It definitely helps to know that.
Absolutely. And I've already seen the legacy you've left. Again, in 92, we became very conscious of the role of the not just spares, but the training pool beyond, like the men would often acknowledge that, yes, there's an 8, but there's also all these other guys that pushed us to be as fast as we are in this 8, you know, it's such a big community. Same with the women's team. I saw that re-enlivened through you and your, you know, your name was on the oar along with Kaja's. That's beautiful. That has carried on and on and on. And I think spread beyond rowing. And I heard Kit say it, you know, on the media, that acknowledging again the people who are around the team that are crucial to the team. I think it's such an important lesson for leadership too, right? That it's not always just this little group here or those who are on the pinnacle, you know, it's always really gigantic. And lots of athletes talk about that at the Olympics this time around. And I think it was sparked by your story, and everyone knows your story. Thank you
Thanks.
both for sharing. And some joyful things. What are some things you've taken away that are just those little wonderful gems in your heart, you know, all these wonderful memories that you notice? Doesn't always have to be your own experience. Sometimes it's things you witnessed, maybe even from the games right now. I mean, I loved it when those 2 high jumpers shared the gold. That was so beautiful, that story. But there's some great ones. Like, sorry, but I just am in love with the Dutch sculler, Caroline. I rode with her dad. Like, I watched him win and his coach swim out to their boat when they won in '88. So there are all these lovely connections, but to see her run toward Emma Twigg from New Zealand, who got the silver on the podium, and the two of them just leaped and hugged each other, you know, seeing such a lot of that camaraderie across countries. What about you guys?
Yeah, I actually will agree with you. Seeing Emma Twigg, she was the Olympic champion in the single, Sophie, she came second this year, but then she was just as excited for Caroline to win, because she obviously knows what that feels like. And even though she just lost to her and came second, she was, yeah, just as happy for her to be experiencing that. And, you know, they had raced each other for the past 3 years, and just, yeah, that base level of respect that they have for each other, and the joy that comes from watching someone else become an Olympic champion, and um, for seeing just other crews like the GB lightweight women's double, who they lost out on a medal by 0.01 in the Tokyo Olympics, and then they were undefeated this quad all the way through to the Olympic final, and yeah, they won the gold medal. And I'm just, yeah, I can't even imagine what that feels like to be fourth by that much, and then yeah, just achieve everything you want to achieve after that.
Yeah. I was thinking about World Cup in 2021 was in New Zealand, and the Black Ferns, the New Zealand's national team, which, you know, rugby is their national sport, like their whole world revolves around rugby. And England was a very strong favorite going into World Cup and had beaten the Black Ferns by, I think, somewhere around 40 points in consecutive games, about maybe 9 months out from the World Cup. And then the Black Ferns had a coaching change. They kind of went through this reformation and reconstruction of their team. And then it was England versus the Black Ferns in the World Cup final in New Zealand at Eden Park, which is a historic ground. And to watch the Black Ferns win on the very last play of the game, where England has a really strong forwards driven, what we call a rolling maul. So they're 5 meters out from the line. They catch the ball at the line out, put the ball back, and they would have driven right through New Zealand, and they had earlier in the game. And New Zealand made a risky play and went up and stole the ball at the line out, and then kicked the ball out to win the game. And being in the stands to witness that, as much as I was sad that it wasn't us, but just seeing the crowd go crazy, and it was the biggest women's rugby crowd ever in history. I think it was 47,000. We've since surpassed it, but to have that kind of atmosphere, New Zealand winning at home against the odds, and then watching, you have like that thrill of victory and the agony of defeat of England. But then in rugby, we always shake hands after the match, not before the match, like they do in some other sports like soccer, rugby, we always make sure that we acknowledge our opponents after the match. And so watching the English girls go through that defeat and then shake the hands of every single New Zealand girl as they New Zealand woman as they went up to go get their medals was pretty, I think, just remarkable show of sportsmanship, and also just the excitement and the thrill of New Zealand getting that win at home against the odds was pretty awe-inspiring.
Wow, thank you both so much for sharing your stories, your reflections, your insights, and inspiring so many of us, right? We are going to share this recording broadly. We have lots of people who sign on for this webinar series, so your words will be heard and appreciated. And I'm just so grateful for sport and the influence it's had on both of you, its ability to reveal all that you both are. And I'm excited for the future as well, Becca. Let's talk about leading national sport organizations, both of you, actually. That would be the solution. All right, take care, and we'll see everybody next time. I don't know anything about what that topic will be, but we'll figure it out. And we'll let you know. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.